The Stafford Voice.
Profiles in history. He believed in the necessity of ships in the fight against Britain, but, ironically, was also one of the last holdouts on choosing actual independence. Joseph Hewes was born on January 23, 1730, in Kingston, New Jersey. He attended Princeton and later was apprenticed to a Philadelphia merchant as a clerk before starting his own business and moving to Edenton, North Carolina in 1756. While there, Hewes raised his political prospects when he fell in love with Isabel Johnston. Unfortunately, just a few days before they were set to be married, she died suddenly. However, his relations with her well-connected family continued as if he had become the Johnstons' son-in-law. His success in business made him viable for politics, and in 1766, he entered the colonial House of Commons. Given time, the buzz for independence would grab hold, and the majority of North Carolina favored independence, even selecting Joseph Hewes to represent them at the Continental Congress in 1774. They thought he would best represent them because of his activism for the American cause of independence. However, initially, Joseph was not in favor of independence, but came to accept the idea due to the urging of his constituents in North Carolina. At the time, he reflected on the possible fate of those in Congress should the British capture them. He wrote, quote, "Were I to suffer in the cause of American liberty, should I not be translated immediately to heaven as Enoch was of old?" Now, Hewes broke philosophically from the Quakers in 1775 when they spoke out against the Continental Congress. And traditionally, the Quakers were pacifists. Ironically, Hewes was not only one of the few in favor of war against Britain, he was one of the few Quakers in Congress. Not only did they oppose war, but strongly opposed the committees that supported war. You see, even though the people of the United States wanted independence, differing opinions were often laughed at. And this put Hewes in a difficult spot. His opinion was often laughed at, even scolded. More than that, in the year leading up to the Revolution, more than two-thirds of the Continental Congress still believed that ties between King George and the colonies could stay intact. Even though Joseph barely spoke in Congress, usually because he would get interrupted by those who disagreed with him, he actively served in many committees, most of which favored the Revolution. So it should come as no surprise that as a strong supporter of rebellion, and not so much independence, Hewes was not at all enthused about the Halifax Resolves, which were basically instructions from the North Carolina Provincial Assembly that if independence were proposed, the North Carolinian delegates should vote in favor of it. The resolves were important not only because they were the first official action calling for independence, but also because they were not unilateral recommendations. They were instead recommendations directed to all the colonies and their delegates assembled. In May of 1776, Joseph Hewes presented the Halifax Resolves to the Continental Congress. The last line of the document reads, quote, "Resolve that the delegates for this colony in the Continental Congress be empowered to concur with the other delegates of the other colonies in declaring independency and forming foreign alliances, resolving to this colony the sole and exclusive right of forming a constitution and laws for this colony, and appointing delegates from time to time, under the direction of a general representation thereof, to meet the delegates of the other colonies for such purposes as shall be hereafter pointed out." Now, Hewes considered the resolves a bit premature, even opposing Richard Henry Lee's independence solution on June 7, 1776. John Adams later recalled Mr. Hewes, who had hitherto constantly voted against it, started suddenly upright and lifting both hands to heaven as if he had been in a trance, cried out, "It is done, and I will abide by it. I would give more for the perfect painting of the terror of horror upon the face of the old majority at that critical moment than for the best piece of Raphael. The question, however, was eluded by an immediate motion for adjournment. Adams gave much of the credit for the unanimity of the states to Hewes's change of heart, as many had been counting on Hewes' opposition to independence. In a letter to his friend James Iredell on June 28, 1776, Hewes expressed his confidence in the forthcoming debate on independence. Quote, "On Monday, the great question of independence and total separation from all political intercourse with Great Britain will come on. It will be carried, I expect, by a great majority. And then I suppose we shall take upon us a new name." Now, early on in 1776, Joseph Hewes was appointed as the Secretary of the Naval Affairs Committee. And John Adams often said that Hewes, quote, "laid the foundation, laid the cornerstone of the American Navy." Alongside General George Washington, Hewes became one of the greatest military achievers in American history. When the time came, Hewes was initially faced with a very ill-equipped navy in which to fight the British Navy. His remedy was to provide his own extensive fleet of ships, outfit them, and select the most capable of men to captain them, one of which was John Paul Jones. Now, Hewes would arrive back in Philadelphia in July 1779 and unfortunately would never return home. Because of his poor health, Joseph sent his resignation to the General Assembly in late 1779. Before returning home to Edenton, North Carolina, he passed away in Philadelphia on November 10th, 1779. He was the only signer of the Declaration of Independence who died at the seat of government. And that's this week's Profiles in History.